The scene opens with a group of travelers making their way with difficulty through a forest as evening falls, as the sun began to set. They were on what is known as the Byron Company's trade route, but one of them soon realized they had lost their way after all the distance they had covered, expressing his frustration at walking in the forest at such a late hour. Tension grew among the members of the caravan, as one of them bluntly asked the group's leader, named Byron, if this was his first time taking this route. The man expressed his regret for signing this contract and hiring only 10 guards, stating that if he had known the road would be this difficult, he would not have undertaken this journey in the first place. Byron tried to defend his position, denying that this was their first journey and justifying their getting lost by saying that the terrain and mountains change over time. Meanwhile, 2 other men, Baxter and Tillich, were observing the situation. Tillich proposed a hypothesis that if the merchants were being truthful about knowing the way, then there must be an external factor that had caused the entire area's terrain to change, before Tillich suddenly called out to him in an angry and warning tone. Suddenly, without any warning, Baxter drew his sword and rushed forward at top speed as the group came under a surprise attack from a gnoll monster. A state of shock prevailed among the men when they noticed that this monster was wearing armor made by the Uruks, and they immediately realized they had fallen into a well-laid trap. Baxter issued his orders for everyone to gather and not to scatter, warning them that anyone who separated from the group would be devoured instantly. The guards found themselves completely surrounded, as countless glowing eyes appeared in the darkness around them. Tillich anxiously asked about their number, and his companion replied that it was better not to try to count them. The monsters launched an all-out attack, and a bloody and violent battle erupted, in which the fighters screamed for the monsters to die. Amidst the chaos, Byron expressed his astonishment at the excessive brutality of the fight, even if they were facing monsters. But he was immediately silenced by a fierce threat from Tillich. Tillich vowed to make the merchants pay a heavy price for this ordeal, provided they remained alive. After eliminating the first wave of monsters, Baxter warned his comrades not to relax, asserting that monster traps are always continuous and do not end easily. No sooner had he finished his words than Byron shouted, pointing to the horizon, where a massive-bodied troll monster appeared. Everyone was stunned and terrified to see a troll appear after their battle with the gnolls. Panic gripped the men's hearts, and one of them shouted the need to disperse immediately, or the troll would finish them all with a single blow. Byron gave in to despair, believing his end had come, and that all the mercenaries were doomed to die. Baxter began to analyze the situation, wondering if this troll was a trained creature or a weapon of war gone out of control. Puzzled by the idea of producing such weapons in large numbers in a forest like this, Baxter realized that escape was now impossible, so he quickly issued his orders, telling 2 of his men to protect and gather the merchants, and ordering Tillich to attract the troll's attention and draw it away from the merchants the next time it threw something. Tillich vehemently objected to the plan, calling Baxter insane, and suggested sacrificing the merchants and using them as bait to escape with their lives. But he then asked Baxter if he had a plan. Baxter confirmed that he did indeed have a plan that Tillich knew well. They would wait for a moment when the troll was distracted and then rush quickly between its legs, a maneuver they had performed many times in their past battles. Despite his question, Tillich seemed terrified by this idea and muttered that he would rather die than repeat it again. As he was running to execute the plan, he suddenly stopped after noticing something strange. He realized the troll was not looking at them, but was staring in a completely different direction. In a sudden moment, before the troll could attack, it abruptly fell to the ground with such tremendous force that it sent Tillich flying into the air. Tillich got up in a state of shock, wondering what had happened, and directed his question to Baxter, asking how he had brought down such a huge monster. Baxter was not responsible. From the darkness emerged another, larger and more terrifying monster with glowing blue eyes. This new creature advanced calmly towards the fallen troll's corpse. Amidst the complete astonishment of the mercenaries and merchants, the monster picked up the troll's body and then coldly crushed its head with its bare hands. As terror gripped one of the merchants, he asked Baxter about the nature of this terrifying creature. Baxter replied that someone from the city like him had likely never heard of it before, and that in this forest at least, this creature was considered the most savage of all, so much so that legends say whoever encounters it never returns alive. He then revealed its identity, saying it was an ogre. The merchant was utterly shocked upon hearing this name. Baxter continued his explanation, clarifying that despite the rarity of ogres, they possess unparalleled strength and agility among other monsters, in addition to a cunning intelligence and a stubborn perseverance in hunting. Baxter himself expressed his astonishment at encountering a creature he had only heard about in tales, especially in such a dire situation. Meanwhile, the merchants were commenting on why the mercenaries were frozen in place like that. Baxter wondered what he should do and if he could escape, but he quickly realized that trying to flee would just make him an easy meal for the monster, and he collapsed where he stood in despair. The ogre advanced towards the collapsed Baxter and, unexpectedly, extended its blood-stained hand and spoke to him, saying that he had been through a tough time and that he would guide him from now on. The ogre reassured him and told him not to be afraid, explaining that despite its appearance, the same blood that runs in human veins also runs in its own. He then revealed his true identity, declaring that his name was Leon and that he was half human and half ogre. After that, Leon led the entire caravan through the forest, until they reached Byron Village, a remote village located in the kingdom of Arnia. As they approached the village's fortified wooden walls, a guard from above noticed them and called out to identify them. The members of the caravan began to feel relieved after their survival. Byron complained of extreme fatigue and pain, saying he thought it was his end, while Tillich muttered some curses directed at the merchants. Leon guided them to the village entrance, and one of the caravan members asked if the barrier was meant to keep monsters out. The guard, whose name turned out to be Daryl, called out to Leon in surprise, asking him how many days he had been away and who the people with him were. Leon returned Daryl's greeting and told him that these were members of a merchant caravan heading to the village and that he had met them while gathering firewood, adding that they had already spoken with the village chief. Despite this, Daryl remained skeptical. He told Leon he trusted his word but had received no report of a caravan arriving at this time. Daryl expressed his concern that they might be bandits disguised as merchants. This accusation angered Byron, who shouted in their defense, explaining that they had simply lost their way and that their own village chief had given them the wrong directions in the first place. But Daryl did not change his stance, insisting that the village's security came first, and told them they would have to leave if they could not prove their identity. The merchant expressed his extreme frustration with the situation and demanded that the guard, Daryl, at least call for the village chief. Leon intervened in the conversation, explaining to Daryl that although security was important, these people were needed. He told him he had heard the forest's cries for help on his way, and concluded that if the path had changed, it meant someone was tampering with the area, and therefore help might be needed. Leon then assured the guard that if things went wrong, he would handle the problem himself, to put him at ease. Later, after being allowed to enter, the scene shifted to the Byron Village Hall, where the caravan members sat with the village chief and some of its residents. The chief, an elderly man, was laughing with the others as they repeated Leon's words, surprised by his statement that he would handle it himself. Byron commented that the chief was overreacting, while one of the merchants expressed his relief at their miraculous survival and safe arrival, and Baxter praised Leon's strength, considering it superior to that of 10 mercenaries combined. The calm did not last long, as Baxter began to question the village chief. He pointed out the defensive barriers he had noticed on his way to the village, which seemed to surround the entire village. Although he understood that monsters and uruks might be common in such a remote place, he felt that these defenses were greatly exaggerated, which led him to ask directly and shockingly if they were preparing for war. While Leon looked at Baxter with surprise, Leon thought to himself that Baxter had a knack for saying the worst things at the most inappropriate times. Silence fell for a few moments. Finally, the chief spoke, admitting that war was indeed a terrible thing. He then addressed Baxter, guessing from his appearance that he was a former mercenary of war, perhaps from Kincaid. The chief elaborated on the concept of war, explaining that in his time it was a sacred revolution for liberation from the uruks who treated humans like cattle. But he saw that today's wars were no longer like that. They had become mere bloodshed for selfish gains that ended in the destruction of both sides. He expressed his hope that such tragedies would never reach their village, asking them to understand that these defenses were built only as a fortress born from the prayers and desires of everyone for peace. Tillich interrupted the chief's speech, calling his logic twisted and accusing him of beautifying the idea of a weapon of war with flowery words. He added that he would have accepted this explanation if it were only about the barriers, but he pointed to Leon, describing him as a monster. Tillich sharply questioned how words could justify the existence of a being capable of crushing a troll with its bare hands in a single blow, considering this level of power to be dangerously unnatural. He explained that war was a sensitive topic for Kincaid, and to prove that Leon was not a weapon, they needed evidence that the existence of such a horrific hybrid was a unique case. Byron felt insulted by the word horrific, and his companion Baxter commented that his words were harsh, while signs of pain appeared on Leon's face. At that point, Leon spoke for himself, saying that he understood their difficulty in accepting him and realized that if they were not convinced he was not a threat, they would spread the rumor that this village was dangerous. But he added that fortunately, he had a way to convince them and offered for them to meet his mother. Leon led the group to a house. On the way, Tillich complained of a foul smell, and Leon replied that he had sprayed his urine to keep monsters away. Leon reached the door of the house and called for his mother, saying he was back. Leon entered, apologizing for being late and justifying it by some errands in the village that had delayed him. The young blonde-haired woman, whom Leon called Mom, welcomed the newcomers and asked them to enter quickly. The scene then flashes back 15 years to Byron Village. On that past night, the village chief, who looked younger, rushed to the wooden barrier after a guard informed him of an imminent danger. The guards weren't sure what exactly was happening, but they asked the chief to come and see for himself. Upon his arrival, the chief froze in terror as he saw a massive monster with glowing red eyes standing before the barrier, and he immediately recognized it as an ogre. The chief issued strict orders for everyone to drop their weapons and retreat immediately, warning them not to provoke the monster, as he had identified it from the monster guide. This monster was Robo, the legendary ogre known as the Wolf of the Forest and the Butcher of the Central Continent. The chief realized they were facing the most dangerous creature they had ever encountered. It was capable of easily breaking through the barrier, and he demanded siege weapons be brought immediately. But one of the villagers pointed out to the chief that there was something strange about the monster's behavior. Despite hours passing, the ogre hadn't moved an inch. The villagers were puzzled by this behavior, wondering if the guide mentioned anything about it, or if the monster wanted something other than to hunt. As the chief pondered the matter anxiously, the ogre suddenly looked at someone lying on the ground. Everyone was surprised when they saw the ogre begin to leave. Then it leaped away from the village. They waited cautiously, and one of them pointed to the person the ogre had left behind. Then they approached to discover that inside it was a person who was still alive. The scene returns to the present, in a house on the outskirts of Byron Village. The caravan members were sitting around a table with Leon and his mother, the blonde-haired young woman. Leon was eating happily, expressing his love for the cheese and ham his mother had prepared, while she asked him to eat slowly. Leon's mother apologized to the guests for the humble meal, explaining that the visit was sudden and her son hadn't told her beforehand, and she also apologized for the hardship they faced reaching this remote place. She then directed her question directly to Baxter, inquiring about their reason for coming here. Tillich noticed the woman's strange accent and whispered to Baxter, who replied that it was an accent spoken only by nobles of royal blood, then muttered angrily that these villagers were disgusting. Leon's mother seemed to understand their suspicions without them speaking, acknowledging that her life with her son in this place was far from ordinary. She added that just seeing them could cause a problem, regardless of any explanation she might offer. She then reminded them that she had already apologized for her son's reckless behavior outside and promised it wouldn't happen again, asking what more she could do to satisfy her guests. Baxter noticed that her way of speaking resembled a negotiation, especially when she pointed out that there being a merchant guild should make reaching an agreement faster. This approach provoked Tillich, who angrily asked Baxter if this situation was negotiable, pointing out that that noblewoman was avoiding a clear answer. He insisted that, as someone from Kincaid, he must know the truth. Baxter tried to calm Tillich down, reminding him that her son was the one who saved their lives and that they should be grateful and leave it at that, but Tillich seemed determined to continue the argument. Tillich ignored Baxter's attempts to calm him and continued to shout at Leon's mother, demanding that she explain why a woman of her standing was hiding in this place, and what had driven her to give birth to a savage hybrid in the first place. Leon's mother tried to stop him, saying his words were hurtful, but Tillich paid no heed and angrily retorted that she should consider her own position first. He described her as pathetic for suffering this fate in a remote region, without even having the strength to face the chaos of the outside world. Tillich burst into an emotional speech about war, talking about how his comrades from Kincaid were being slaughtered on the battlefields. He mentioned how the endless lust for victory among the warring nations had driven them to even use demons in their battles, and he swore he would never forget the atrocities committed for control of a piece of land. He concluded his speech by expressing his extreme disgust at finding one of the disgusting hybrid war weapons, even in this secluded place. At this point, Baxter yelled his name, Tillich, which silenced him immediately. Baxter then took charge, beginning to question Leon's mother with a firm calm. He asked her if she and her son were the secret the village was hiding behind all those defensive barriers. He then asked her what kind of grudge would drive a woman of her standing to willingly accept the seed of the monster called the Crimson King. Leon's mother seemed deeply affected and pleaded with them, saying it wasn't what they thought and that it was difficult for her to explain the truth. Leon tried to protect her, shouting, "Mom!" But Tillich coldly ordered her to tell the truth. Tillich interjected again sarcastically, asking if it wasn't out of a grudge, then was it just a special taste for mingling with other races? Before he could finish his sentence, Leon's mother screamed in terror, "No, Leon!" At that moment, Tillich was struck by a violent, invisible force that knocked him to the ground, leaving blood flowing from him as he gasped for breath. Leon's mother fell to the ground trying to stop him. Leon was the source of the attack, standing and panting heavily, a strange red spider-like symbol having appeared on his chest. While Leon was in a state of shock, Baxter moved quickly and grabbed Tillich. Leon looked nervously at what he had done, then looked at his mother with worry in his eyes. While his mother rushed to him, asking him to calm down, Leon called out to her in a faint voice, "Mom." Baxter seized this moment, approaching them while watching with glowing eyes. Leon transformed into a more bestial form, with sharp teeth and pointed ears, and warned Baxter not to come near his mother. Baxter clarified that the blade of his sword was not aimed at his mother, but at Leon himself, who no longer looked human in his eyes. Leon's mother screamed her son's name, but Baxter reassured her that he had avoided seriously injuring him, and the blow was only to calm him down. But Baxter looked surprised, as he realized his strike hadn't penetrated Leon's body at all. Baxter concluded that the ogre's blood was the reason, and that a superficial attack would not be enough. Meanwhile, Baxter noticed Leon's gaze was fixed on his mother, realizing she might be the next target, and moved quickly to take a defensive stance and block the upcoming attack, but Leon grabbed him and threw him away. Leon leaped up and headed towards Baxter, moving the battle to the nearby forest under the moonlight. Baxter was struggling to face Leon's immense power, but he noticed his innate intelligence, as even in his enraged state, he chose to fight in an open space that suited his large body. Then Baxter realized something deeper. Leon was deliberately choosing his moves so as not to endanger his mother back at the house. Leon quickly approached and attacked Baxter from close range, but Baxter easily dodged it, which stunned Baxter as he realized Leon was skillfully mimicking his own combat moves, wondering how he managed to grasp them so quickly. Leon delivered a powerful blow to Baxter that knocked him to the ground. Tillich watched the scene with concern, realizing that Baxter was in real trouble. Leon's mother moved towards the site of the duel, and as Leon was preparing to deliver a final blow to Baxter, drops of light began to fall from the sky. At that moment, Baxter realized he had seen enough. He understood that Leon had managed, with just a glance, to analyze his moves and prepare a perfect counterattack. He admitted that if it weren't for the glowing green pendant around Leon's neck, that counterattack would have instantly killed him, and he expressed his amazement at the existence of a tool capable of controlling a rampaging ogre in such a way. Baxter remembered Leon's mother and commented that she was a truly remarkable woman to be able to handle her son's power. Leon began to calm down gradually, at which point Baxter stepped forward and offered a formal apology. He explained that as a member of Kincaid, he had to deal cautiously with the threat of hybrids used as weapons of war, and admitted he had been overly sensitive because this was the first time he had seen such a case. He then told Leon that he now saw him as just an intelligent and disciplined child living in a human society, and promised that his group would keep their secret for his and his mother's safety. Leon calmed down completely and returned to his normal form, looking extremely exhausted. His mother called to him and asked him to come and rest as it was getting late. Leon went to her and hugged her tightly, crying on her shoulder as he called out, "Mom." Outside, Tillich lay injured on the ground, cursing the whole situation. The next morning, the caravan left the village. Leon's mother was in her house preparing food. After she finished setting the table, she didn't sit down to eat, but rather waited for her son Leon to return after he finished guiding the caravan on its way. The scene shifts to Leon moving with the caravan, leading them to the desired path. Byron was among the caravan, complaining that the return journey was harder than the arrival, and Baxter wondered why they were taking a winding road. Leon replied that it wasn't just about avoiding danger, but because the forest was telling him this was the safe path, and he assured them that once they passed this forest, their way would be completely safe. The caravan was now traveling near the border of Helbrun, and the merchant was carrying the still unconscious Tillich, while Baxter assured him he would pay him generously for carrying him. As for Leon, he had joined them to lead and guide them on their way. The caravan continues its journey, with Leon calling Baxter "Uncle." Leon apologizes to Baxter for the rough road but reassures him that they are approaching the city. Baxter seems relieved, then asks Leon if he is tired after spending nights repairing his house, but Leon replies that it was nothing. Leon excitedly tells Baxter that all along the way he has been remembering the adventure stories he told him about the city, a place he only knew by its smell from a distance. Baxter is surprised that Leon has never heard these stories before, and Leon explains that the villagers and his mother avoided talking about them. The merchant Byron guesses they were worried that a naive young man like Leon might be deceived in the outside world, but adds that one doesn't truly mature without going through some hardships. Leon also mentions that he enjoyed the tales of Uncle Varon, the merchant who could read the forest, and his secret to business success, which was hard bargain discount. Leon wonders if he could master this skill to survive in the city, which makes the merchant regret telling him, fearing he might imitate it and get into trouble. Baxter asks Leon if he has ever left his village of Byron before, and if the village chief forbids him from doing so. Leon replies that it's not imposed on him, but ultimately his personal choice. He explains that he sometimes feels the village barrier is there to protect him personally because the village is the only place that accepts him as he is. He then reveals another, more important reason. His mother lives alone, and she became unable to walk for life after his birth. He says he didn't know this because she never showed her pain, but he heard from the villagers that she was a noble lady from a prestigious family, Leon concludes that she gave up everything for him, and therefore he cannot leave her for his own desires. The merchant comments that this is unfortunate. Leon adds that his upbringing was certainly difficult. Due to his ogre-inherited appetite, he only wanted to eat raw meat as a child, which horrifies the merchant. Baxter suddenly changes the subject and asks Leon directly if he had received prior orders to monitor the Veron Guild's trade route through the forest. Leon gets flustered and tries to evade, claiming their meeting was just a coincidence, but Baxter insists, saying he can't lie. The merchant clarifies that he is grateful for being saved, but it would become a problem if Leon were acting on secret orders. Leon asserts that it's not about war or anything frightening. Then he confesses the truth. The forest surrounding their village was infested with Uruk bandits. Although their numbers weren't large, they were dangerous enough to threaten merchants and small mercenary groups, leading to the disruption of trade routes that are the village's livelihood. Baxter realizes this is the reason for the village's secrecy, and that Leon had been leaving his scent in the forest to mark his territory and scare away enemies, which Leon confirms. Leon adds that the bandits' tracks suddenly disappeared, and although the village's defenses might have contributed, he believes his presence as the ogre of the forest had the greatest impact. Baxter asks if he did all that just for the village's reputation, but Leon says no, explaining there's more to it. Leon reveals the real danger, saying that the Uruks have been acting strangely lately, starting to tame gnoll and troll monsters, and even going as far as to change the forest's terrain itself. He adds that it feels as if the forest itself is crying out for help. Leon tries to sound optimistic, saying things will be fine and he'll deal with them himself if necessary, but he suddenly stops. Then he points ahead, announcing their arrival at their destination, the city of Ridden. Leon arrives with the caravan at the entrance of Ridden City, where Baxter bids him farewell. He thanks him for bringing them, describing their relationship as precious, despite it being with someone of another race. The merchant expresses his hope that Leon's wish to travel outside his village will one day come true. Leon responds with a faint laugh, and the merchant encourages him, saying the opportunity might be easier than he thinks. He suggests he join a traveling circus troupe called the Noon Circus Troupe, which accepts members of different races, as a way to travel the world and earn money. Baxter is surprised by the merchant's knowledge of such things, and the other responds with feigned anger. Leon waves goodbye to the caravan as it enters the city. As soon as they are gone, Leon's expression turns serious and worried as he turns back towards the forest, hoping that no problems have occurred in the village during his absence. Then he moves quickly in the direction of the village. The scene flashes back 8 years, where we see someone talking to Leon, who was only 5 years old. Veron teases him, saying he has grown a lot and become very big for a child his age. Leon's mother was working hard preparing meat. The man's tone changes to sadness, and he tells Leon that seeing him reminds him of his own childhood, when he lost his family, his home, and everything, because of the Lord and the Knights, and had to flee into the dangerous forest at the age of 10. The man tells Leon that he believes Byron Village was the only place that could accept him and his mother, because all its inhabitants had shared the same kind of pain and suffering. We return to the present, where Leon is running back to his village, but he suddenly stops when he sees smoke rising from the direction of the village. Panic seizes him, and he starts running at full speed, calling for his mother, his confusion increased by the absence of any trace of monsters in the area. As he gets closer, he sees the village barrier is on fire, and feels a temporary relief that the fire has not yet reached his home. But as he enters the burning forest, he realizes the smell of the fire is not natural, and that someone deliberately started the fire and burned incense with it to intentionally hide the village's scent. Leon wonders about the identity of the perpetrator and the reason for their actions, and realizes he must return as quickly as possible. On his way, he finds Mr. Nielsen, the man who was speaking to Leon in his memory, fatally wounded and shot with arrows. Nielsen struggles to say Leon's name, while Leon tries to help him and carry him to the village for treatment. Nielsen stops him, realizing his time has come, and gives him a final warning as he breathes his last. He asks Leon that when he returns to the village, no matter what he sees there, he must keep his composure and his mind. After Nielsen's death, Leon continues on his way with sorrow and determination. Leon remembers Nielsen's final words as he finally reaches the village gates. There, he sees a horrifying scene, where organized soldiers are standing on the barriers, shooting arrows at the monsters below. Leon was shocked upon his arrival to find that the attack was not by rampaging monsters, but by an organized army of monsters who had positioned themselves below the barriers, raining arrows down on the villagers. On the walls, Commander Kane gave orders for everyone to prepare to fire, emphasizing the need to target the trolls carrying ladders first, as the invaders were already climbing the wall. Kane expressed his confusion at how what he thought was just a handful of Uruk bandits had turned into an organized army so quickly, and he was certain that someone was behind this systematic attack. Suddenly, one of his men shouted his name, pointing in terror at something beyond the attacking force. Behind the army, a massive, terrifying creature with glowing red eyes appeared, riding a giant wolf-like beast, Warg, striking terror into the hearts of the defenders who wondered about the size and identity of these invaders. They had never before seen someone capable of taming a Warg. Cain identified the leader as an Uruk from the wastelands, the kind only seen on the battlefield of Truvinia, and was surprised by his presence here. Suddenly an arrow was shot and hit one of the defenders, who cried out in pain. Cain addressed his men, confirming that this was not just a random Uruk attack. The arrow carried a message, and as Cain ordered his men to stop the wounded man's bleeding, the Uruk commander ordered something to be sent immediately, and it seemed his message was directed at the village's little ogre. Below, the attack continued as the invading forces tried to climb the ladders, so Cain ordered his troops to prepare and release a volley of arrows to prevent them from ascending. The arrows were fired intensely, and the Uruk commander's deputy watched the battle with contempt, commenting that he hadn't expected the villagers to fight so bravely. But at that moment, an arrow hit him, and he fell to the ground dead. The massive commander dismounted his beast and looked at the humans with disdain. Meanwhile, one of the defenders examined the fallen message, wondering about its contents and noting that the writing was not in the Uruk language. The monster commander ordered his followers, and they brought a group of human prisoners. Cain prepared to order another volley of arrows, but one of his men suddenly stopped him and told him to look. The defenders saw that the scouts they had sent out earlier, including Daryl, were being led by the enemy. Cain shouted for everyone to cease the attack, having realized the enemy was using their comrades as human shields. Cain saw his son, Daryl, among the hostages and collapsed, wondering in despair why this was happening. One of the men warned Cain that the attackers were advancing towards the barrier gate and urged him to make a quick decision. Below, a field commander ordered his men to block the way with their bodies if necessary, knowing that the fall of the gate meant the entire village's doom. Meanwhile, some villagers were hiding in a building. One of them wondered fearfully why they were hiding instead of helping to fortify the gates. But another warrior silenced them, pointing out that they hadn't noticed their previous battles against monsters were suspiciously easy, and insisted that fighting this way was futile and that the attackers must be after something specific. Outside, the Uruks brought a huge wooden log and began to batter the main gate, while the defenders behind it groaned under the force of the violent blows, trying to hold on. Outside the walls, the Uruk commander was talking to someone. The other person was impressed with the battle's progress, commenting that the village's defenses would soon fall thanks to the commander's combat experience, and confirming that, as promised, he would also help him with his hunt. Meanwhile, on the wall, one of the men was urging Cain to make a quick decision to save the situation. Cain was in a bitter internal conflict while his son Daryl called out to him from among the hostages with a faint voice, "Father." One of the warriors stepped forward and told Cain they had made up their minds. Although he understood his hesitation since the hostage was his son, there was no other way to save him, expressing his regret for this difficult choice. Cain couldn't bring himself to give the order to fire the arrows, so the warrior apologized to him, and another defender took the initiative and gave the order for the archers to prepare to shoot. Suddenly, someone leaped from the trees with incredible speed and landed with a thunderous impact amidst the Uruk army. The Uruk commander welcomed him, saying the little ogre had finally appeared. The shock of his landing sent monsters flying in all directions, causing chaos and astonishment among the defenders on the wall. Cain wondered in confusion if this was really Leon. The Uruk commander spoke again to his hidden ally, telling him the prey had taken the bait as planned, and asked him what he would do now. In the middle of the battlefield, Leon was taking down monsters one after another. Leon saw Daryl, wounded and lying on the ground, who called out to him with difficulty. Leon ran towards him, calling out in shock, "Daryl, brother!" Leon flew into a rage and began to rampage. The Uruk commander addressed him from a distance, expressing his surprise at finding a rare hybrid, a half-ogre, the fiercest of all monsters, in such a remote place and not on a battlefield. He then asked him sarcastically if he had ever wondered why no one had come to kill him until now. The scene flashes back in time, revealing the identity of this Uruk. He was one of the Uruks from the wastelands of Truvinia, which had been the arena for a great war between races. They were war mercenaries who had made a name for themselves there. They were a hybrid of humans and Uruks, having inherited the strengths of both races, excelling in the use of weapons, leadership, and even guerrilla warfare. But their numbers were very small because they could only be produced through a lost, mystical method. When the war ended and they were left without money, they began to earn a living by accepting all sorts of dangerous hunting missions. They acted as protectors of their own hunting grounds and fought for survival, even facing the infamous ogres. But unfortunately, after a grueling battle, only one of them remained. Thus, the name Uruk, which once referred to an entire race, became the name of a single individual. Over the following years, this sole survivor kept watch over a remote forest in the kingdom of Arena. He waited patiently for the moment of revenge against his people's enemy, watching over that enemy's offspring. The Uruk commander ordered his army not to give Leon any chance, telling them to attack him all at once. He then ordered them to execute the Troll Subjugation Formation and the Null Encirclement Formation simultaneously. Despite these preparations, the Uruk army was retreating before the power of Leon alone. One of the Uruk leaders wondered in confusion how a single ogre could hold them off like this, realizing that at this rate, they were sacrificing their men in vain. On the village walls, the defenders noticed that the Uruks had halted their advance towards the village and had all turned their attention to Leon. Anxiety spread among them, wondering if Leon would be alright facing this crowd alone. Cain watched Leon fight, before Leon was hit by an attack that trapped his foot. The Uruk commander himself entered into a fierce battle against Leon. The two exchanged brutal blows, and although the Uruk commander was severely wounded and lost some of his limbs, Leon managed to deliver a finishing blow and knock him to the ground. The wounded Uruk commander felt that the sacrifice of his limbs was worth it. As he panted, he declared that the time had come. He addressed the unconscious Leon, saying that when his true self, long suppressed, awakens, everyone he cared about will disappear. Leon would become a rampaging beast, unable to control his instincts, and if he continued like this, he would be left completely alone. After speaking his final words, the Uruk commander collapsed from his injuries, while Leon's body began to transform into a more bestial form. Seeing their leader fall, one of the remaining Uruk soldiers ordered everyone to retreat and take cover, realizing they could no longer win now that their leader had sacrificed his life. After the battle ended, Cain and his men descended from the wall to assess the situation. They found Leon unconscious but still alive, which amazed Cain. One of the men commented that Cain himself had seen how Leon took countless attacks with his body, and that in the short time it took them to come down, he had recovered remarkably, making him wonder if Leon was just an ordinary ogre. Cain wondered if Leon would be able to get up, especially since the Uruk's weapons were coated with a neurotoxin capable of felling a troll. Noting that they had many questions to ask him, they were interrupted by the voice of the monster commander, who asked why they were bothering to wake the monster when they could interrogate the cripple lying on the ground. They were surprised to see the Uruk commander still alive, and one blamed the other for not confirming his death. The Uruk commander reassured them not to worry, as he felt death approaching due to his massive blood loss, and told them that interrogating a man who no longer clings to life is the easiest kind of interrogation. One of the men warned Cain not to be swayed by his words. Then Cain began his interrogation. Cain stated that the Uruk was the one who had gathered all these bandits, then pointed to the message he had sent, concluding it was not written in the Uruk language, which meant it was intended for someone who could read it, and that person must have been Leon. Cain continued, explaining that Leon had never left this forest his entire life, so it was impossible for him to have gone to the wastelands and caused a grudge with them. He then asked him directly about his relationship with Leon, and why he was specifically targeting him. The Uruk commander laughed, saying he could already see how they would treat the ogre from now on, and since his revenge has been achieved early, he would answer their questions without any regret. The Uruk commander began to reveal the truth, saying that their belief that they had successfully hidden and protected the half-ogre was a huge misunderstanding. He explained that while they were hiding behind their massive barrier, the butcher of the central continent, Leon's father, had begun to reappear, and evidence was uncovered indicating that a blue dragon was behind it all. This news caused a great shock at the time. The Uruk continued, explaining that they were surely aware of the nature of ogres. A full-grown ogre resists to the death and refuses to submit. But this legendary monster, who was of a completely different class, chose to submit. He mentioned that his obsession began here, wondering what reason could possibly make this creature surrender. He then revealed that he realized the whole affair had started because of a human woman, which shocked Cain, who asked how he knew. The Uruk replied that he smelled blood on Leon, the same scent of the butcher's blood that was imprinted in his memory. After that, the Uruk revealed his true plan. He had issued strict orders that no one was to target the hybrid. To achieve this, he gathered the Uruks and deployed them in the forest to torment it, even creating a perfect labyrinth so that no stranger would dare to enter. The barrier they had all believed in was serving its purpose, but it would have been useless if this forest hadn't belonged to the Uruks from the beginning. He concluded his sarcasm by saying that in the end they discovered nothing, and all they did was hide the half-hybrid until he grew into this monster. Then he wondered in a final moment of reflection if he truly cared about revenge for his people, or if he just wanted to make Leon an outcast like himself. After these words, he breathed his last. Elsewhere, the village elders were in discussion. One of them opined that although Leon's mother had raised him well, his true nature was something he couldn't control. He questioned whether they would be able to control Leon if he became more like an ogre. Another pointed out that the disciplined Uruk army couldn't do anything against him alone, and that although they survived thanks to him, if something went wrong and he turned on them, the entire village would be in danger. The village chief shouted, telling them to stop this talk. But Cain, still grieving the loss of Daryl, insisted he couldn't fail to protect the village as well. He demanded that the chief take other measures if he wasn't able to get rid of Leon, warning that dragon hunters would soon come to the village looking for him. The chief tried to calm Kane, acknowledging that what happened to Daryl was very unfortunate, but reminded him that Leon was only 13 years old, and what happened was not of his own will. He asked him, as a village elder, if he didn't know their priorities. Kane became agitated, saying that what he meant was that they had to act before it was too late. The chief cut him off and ordered him to stop, warning him that the boy might hear them. At that moment, Leon had already woken up and heard everything. He wondered to himself, have the elders started fighting because of me? Because I went into a rampage? He wondered why he did it, and if this is what his father was like, he hated it. He hated the idea that this was his image in the eyes of others. The elders were surprised when they realized he was awake. The village chief was walking with Leon, reassuring him that there was no need to worry and that he would get better soon. He told him that he was almost fine now, but they were a little late in telling his mother, Leonia, expressing his hope that she would understand the situation given the circumstances. Then the village chief assured him that no matter what anyone said, Leon was the one who saved the village, and that he was very grateful and proud of him. Leon responded calmly. The chief gave him some antidote herbs and ordered him to prepare them and drink them with every meal when he returned. Leon thanked him and told him he would inform his mother. Leon said he had to go now because his mother was waiting for him, expressing his hope that everyone inside was okay. The chief agreed and allowed him to leave. Leon jumped back to his house under the moonlight, arriving quickly, where he found his mother waiting for him outside. He landed and called out to her, then hurried towards her, warning her that staying near the fence was dangerous, especially on a night like this. His mother told him to stop and calm down. She told him that she was fine and that there had been no disturbance there, but she pointed out that this was not the problem now. She addressed him, saying she had heard that he had intervened in the chaos that occurred in the village himself, even though she had asked him not to. She mentioned that they had told her that Nielsen had died at the outer fence, and asked him if that was what made him lose control. Leon remembered Nielsen's kind words to him when he was young, and how he wished he had a son like him. Leon apologized to his mother for worrying her, and admitted that he couldn't bear to see Nielsen die that way, explaining that he was a special person to him. He remembered how Nielsen had warned him in his final moments never to lose his composure. Leon wondered if Nielsen was afraid of what he might face or the truths he might discover there. Then he looked at his mother and asked her directly, "Is this ferocity that he showed inherited from his father?" His mother asked him to stop, and signs of pain appeared on her face as she apologized to him, saying she couldn't answer. Leon shouted, calling out to her, as she walked away from him, repeating her apologies, until Leon caught her and hugged her. Elsewhere, in the kingdom of Suaran within the lands of Baron Fells, the Baron was speaking angrily with one of his knights, Herman. He was complaining about the news of the dragon hunt being breached, describing it as nonsense and a waste of effort, wondering if they had forgotten why it was banned in the first place. He mocked their talk of traditions and desires, considering that they did not understand the concept of practical feasibility. He continued his sarcasm, wondering how their efforts could compare to the power of Hellbrine, and that he could not understand the feasibility of searching for a blue dragon. The Baron told his knight Herman, whom he described as his practical knight, that he would have been in trouble without him, as he could not ignore the sacred mobilization order. Herman reassured him, and told him that he had made sure there was no room for complaint from the motherland, as he had carried out the required duties for the time being, which gave them some time. Herman added that, as the Baron had predicted, there were an unusual number of strange things in this dragon hunting mission. He praised his master's sharp insight, revealing that the investigation had revealed the birth of a hybrid creature, half ogre and half human. The Baron rejoiced, declaring that this is what he meant by practical feasibility, and that this hunt would not be disappointing. Herman, of course, confirmed this. After the Baron ordered his knight Herman to wait for a moment, Herman looked at him coldly, thinking to himself that the day the Baron's head would join his collection was not far off. Elsewhere, in the city of Ridden, someone was asking about a person named Tilok. The mercenary stopped a masked man, asking sarcastically if the honorable knights thought a mercenary was an easy person to deal with. The mercenary noticed 3 people following them. Tilok complained to the masked man that this situation was different from what he had been promised. The mission was supposed to be done quickly. The masked man responded sharply to Tilok, warning him that his insolence had crossed the line and that he should know his place regardless of being from Ridden, or his life might end before the mission even began. Tilok replied that since they were already here, could they handle the pursuers if things went wrong, expressing his doubt in their ability to face an ogre in the forest. The masked man muttered a single word, practical feasibility. Meanwhile, Leon was alone in the forest. He realized that this was not the time to stand idly by, and that he needed to hunt before dark, for since he could not return to the village for a while, he had to take care of himself. Leon set off and began to hunt a wild boar, with a skill he did not know he possessed, for he thought that he had never learned to hunt before. He realized that his mother must have avoided teaching him that to raise him as a human as much as possible, and he saw that this was understandable. After he struck the boar and knocked it to the ground, Leon thought that perhaps because of his father's blood, he could move lightly and understand the nature of beasts, tricking the prey, exhausting it, and then striking its weak point in a moment of inattention. He wondered if his mother was afraid of his father's image appearing in him. Back in the Byron forest, the masked man and his companions were on their way. Tilak was still complaining, describing the forest as a labyrinth, where armed goblins and trained trolls were attacking them. The masked man was surprised by the idea of a trained troll, so Tilak sarcastically asked him if he believed in a race war in such a remote place. The masked man considered it an exaggeration, but Tilak insisted that it was something like that. Tilak spoke, pointing out that even in these remote areas, there are villages connected to the merchant guild, but recently there has been a big commotion with the surrounding orcs, and that the instigator was none other than the Uruk of Travinia. The masked man recognized the name, noting that he was a leading figure during the race war. Tilak commented that it was strange for him to come all this way here, then asked the masked man with a sly smile for his opinion, pointing out that the matter seemed more complicated than just hunting a beast. The masked man told him that there was a lot that would surprise him and urged him to hurry because they were about to arrive. As they advanced, the masked man's companions ambushed a goblin and interrogated him, but the goblin insisted that he had already told them everything he knew. The masked man's companion was thinking that since the Uruk had died, he realized that Herman's judgment was correct. He had thought it was just a simple village. He told his companion that Herman would follow the Kincaid mercenary, Tylok, to another place, which seemed to be connected to the prey. One of the men was surprised by this change of plan, as they had agreed to meet at the village entrance, but the leader did not give him a clear answer. The leader guessed that Herman must have found something more interesting there, then ordered his men to move according to the instructions, and they began to approach Leonia's house. Inside, Leonia was doing some housework, but she had a flashback to when Leon asked her about his father. Suddenly, Leonia felt someone outside, trying to break into the house. A little later, Tilak burst through the door, shouting that there was no one inside, but he was surprised to find her. He sarcastically apologized for the intrusion, claiming he had not realized the presence of the noble lady of incomparable beauty. Leonia addressed him calmly, pointing out that he had visited her again. She told him that she did not know the reason for his visit, but a long time had passed since their last contact with the village, and that her son was living in peace. She told him that there was nothing to be gained from here now. Tilak mocked her words, describing the situation as a pleasant encounter, and insulted her, saying that she preferred the size of a savage ogre to her noble status, calling her worse than the village prostitutes. Then he officially announced, as a Kincaid warrior, Tylok of Ridden, that he would now have a meeting with the princess of the Arcadian Empire, Ben-Salat. The masked man, Herman, appeared in the room. Herman expressed his surprise at finding her in such a humble place, considering that wasting her life here was excessively noble. Herman stepped forward, introduced himself as a knight of Suaran, and asked her to return to their homeland. Leonia replied that she did not know how the truth had reached this remote place, but it was too late. She added that the Ben-Salat they knew would have found her much faster, and since she had been left alone until now, the matter was already settled. Herman replied that she had been officially declared dead, but Ben-Salat had never given up hope, which meant that Her Highness could have returned at any time. Herman asked her if she considered her current situation unacceptable. Then he reassured her, saying that she could put her worries aside, because he was the one who would erase that filthy blood. Outside, the masked man was discussing his plan with his men. He mentioned that the target, Leon, resides here regularly, and that although he is a hybrid, his behavior pattern is no different from that of an ogre, suggesting that it is just an animal instinct. He added that he had heard that Leon could communicate, but in the end, an ogre remains an ogre. He expressed his relief at that, as he was afraid he would be too human, pointing out that he was still young, about 13 years old. He ordered them to prepare the ogre hunting formation, and achieve some results before they met with Master Herman. Meanwhile, Leon was returning with the boar he had caught. He thought that it was late, and noticed that the smell of the meat was particularly foul. Although he didn't mind, he knew his mother hated the smell. He decided to ask Aunt Ben to put a lot of spices on it. Then he became worried as he thought that his mother's face had become very sad lately, and that she was not answering his questions, and he concluded that what had happened before must have been because of him. Leon was walking back to his house, hoping his mother would feel better soon. Suddenly his eyes widened in alarm, and before he could comprehend what was happening, he was ambushed by several attackers. He was wounded but fought back fiercely, wondering in confusion about the reason and source of this attack. He realized that he had not smelled or sensed their presence just before the attack, and concluded that this was definitely an organized hunt. He looked around anxiously, trying to locate his enemies, and wondered who they were. He continued to dodge the blows, but he was wounded again with a deep gash when one of the masked men hit him from behind. Leon fell to his knees, in pain and wondering why. He thought that all this time, he had been living in hiding in complete peace. So why were they chasing him again? He felt that this was a great injustice. As one of the attackers raised his sword to deliver the final blow, Leon's eyes shone with determination, deciding not to give up anymore. Meanwhile, inside the house, Tilak was mocking Herman, describing him as the predictable person who was tired of serving a nouveau riche nobleman who had bought his position. He blamed him for losing his composure at such an opportunity. Tilak continued his insults, considering that all nobles like him were pathetic, and that the condescending looks Leonia had given him before were nothing but hollow recklessness. Herman thought to himself, saying that they could argue as they wished, but things would not go their way. Leonia told them that the one who would shed blood in the end would be the visitor. Suddenly, Herman looked towards the door in surprise, and at that moment, Leon burst into the room with force, extending his hand to grab Herman, but he stopped before he touched him. Herman took this opportunity and pointed his sword at him. Leon skillfully parried Herman's swift sword strike. Herman expressed his admiration for Leon's movement, wondering where he had learned such agility. Their clash resulted in a powerful surge of energy, which stunned Tilak. Tilak thought to himself that Herman's audacity was beyond normal, and wondered if Herman was hiding his true strength. Leon was also surprised to find a sword master in this place. Herman stood with his sword glowing, while he held his mother, protecting her from Herman's attacks, and Leonia cried out his name in anxiety. Leonia told Leon to calm down, assuring him that they would not be able to harm her, and urged him to hide and get out of there immediately. But Herman delivered a powerful blow of his sword's energy towards Leon, who cried out in pain. Herman announced that in the next round there would be no mercy, but before that, he would listen to any last excuses his lowly mouth might utter. Wondering how a mere beast could defeat a knight, even if he was just a novice. He was wondering in amazement how it happened. The scene flashes back for a few moments to the Byron forest, where the masked man's companion was panting. He said that although he was just a small beast, he had never enjoyed killing the young. His companion replied that he didn't seem like it. The man noticed that Leon's size was slightly smaller than a full-grown ogre. The man told Leon that resistance was pointless because he could not change what he was born as, and that the only reason for the prey's existence was to be hunted. In an instant, Leon moved with incredible speed and dodged the man's attack, who was shocked by his movement. Leon launched a counterattack and severely wounded the man. His companion looked at him in shock, wondering how Leon had managed to predict his movements with such accuracy, and the wounded attacker wondered if it was possible even if he was a trained creature. More importantly, it was illogical, as Leon was supposed to be unconscious and in a state of rage now. Another man wondered angrily if the poisonous drug had not worked properly, and decided to quickly finish off Leon before he fully recovered. But Leon faced him calmly, revealing that he knew the needles they had thrown at him were poisoned, and that they wanted to turn him into a beast for the hunt. The man was shocked by Leon's intelligence and his ability to understand the situation, even feeling the echo of the forest. Leon asked them what harm he had done to them, and whether being born this way was a sin that required him to willingly accept death. Then he turned the question on them, wondering if the beasts they had faced so far had died willingly for them, and then attacked them. Leon knocked down the man who screamed in terror at his crazy movements. The attackers realized that Leon was emitting the poison that had spread in his body in the form of a hallucinogenic vapor and using it against them. At this moment, the roles were reversed, and they became the prey. Leon moved with lightning speed among them, and the man was terrified because he had not touched a single hair of him. Realizing that the smoke that had hidden their scent had cleared, he panicked, for if this situation continued, Leon would surely head towards Master Herman, which should never happen. Leon wondered to himself, is he a beast or a human, and does it really matter? Then he wondered what form he should take to be able to live. Meanwhile, Herman was wondering if it was time, but he decided it didn't matter, and that he would interrogate his disciples himself later. For his part, Herman addressed Leon, saying that he was just curious about a beast's point of view for a moment, then coldly ordered him to make sure he died clearly in front of his mother. For in this way, the princess would easily give up. Herman attacked, but Leon stubbornly resisted him, asserting that he would never let him do as he pleased. Leon parried Herman's attack while protecting his mother. Leon repeated his insistence that he would not let him have his way. Herman looked at him angrily, while in the background, Tilak was cursing the situation, considering what was happening to be madness, and wondering why everyone who used the aura blade had such sharp tempers. Then he thought to himself that things were going as planned. Leon jumped out of the house, moving away from where his mother was, so that nothing would happen to her if he fought with his full strength. Herman stood gathering his energy, and suddenly, he brought out a long spear glowing with energy, and charged the spear with his internal energy, and launched a devastating attack, and aimed it in Leon's direction, creating a massive explosion. From a distance, the masked man's companion saw the explosion and shouted in amazement that it was Master Herman. He wondered angrily if that ogre had finally gotten on his nerves. He explained to his companion that, in a way not befitting a swordmaster, Master Herman always carried a long spear for practical feasibility, although this weapon was despised for being used by farmers. Herman had not overlooked its specialized power in hunting, but he only used it in very rare circumstances, which meant the situation was serious. The man shouted excitedly that he had seen the explosion, and in this way they were able to confirm Master Herman's location and ordered his companion to move at top speed, but the other warned him that moving quickly might attract the attention of the night beasts, which would put them in great danger. The first replied angrily that they had already let the ogre escape due to their negligence, and that what they should fear now was the knight's reprimand more than the beasts, and that there was no time to hesitate. They rushed quickly towards the place from which the spear had been launched. Elsewhere, Leon was moving through the forest. He felt dizzy and foggy, perhaps due to the effect of the poison. His body was moving on its own, and he wondered if this was the nature he had inherited from his father, the principle of the hunt. He felt that his senses as a hunter had heightened, and that the hunter would always pursue his prey, especially if it was human. Herman's spear appeared, chasing Leon. Suddenly he felt the massive explosion of energy, and the spear shot towards him at high speed, inflicting serious damage on him. The village chief was talking to the elders about Leonia, when they noticed unusual smoke rising in the direction of her house, and they wondered if something had happened after a period of calm. One of them mentioned that Ken had warned them that Leon's lineage would soon bring trouble, and that they should be very careful. Others wondered if they could stand idly by while Leon and Leonia's lives might be in danger, and suggested that they at least check on the matter. But the village chief hesitated, saying that Leonia was with Leon, and if the matter was beyond Leon's ability to handle, they wouldn't be able to do much either. While the chief was wondering if the village's safety was the priority, one of the elders objected, saying that Leonia's safety might be the biggest threat to the village. He announced that if the defense force was incapable, he would move himself. At that, the others decided to follow him and set off towards the source of the smoke. In the forest, a pack of wolves was following the scent of Leon's blood after he was injured. In the forest, the masked man's companions were moving towards Herman's location. After the masked man's companions reached the site, Herman finds his colleagues defeated. Their leader told Herman that they were too late, and that their failure was certain. Herman sarcastically asked him if he should consider that an insult. The man warned him desperately, telling him to be extremely careful, and explained to him that although the ogre is an intelligent creature, it follows instinct, not logic. Herman told them that Leon possesses human intelligence in addition to his innate nature, and that he has been subdued as a human. The man told him that they were just parties helping Master Herman in his work. Herman replied, "Good," then asked them if, from a practical feasibility standpoint, he should spare their lives, and ordered them to give him their non-sword-wielding hands. As he was thinking about the next problem, he noticed the arrival of the village elders, and smiled, saying that the bait had arrived just in time. One of the villagers tried to ask Herman why they were there, but the elder silenced him. Someone asks the village chief if they are capable of defeating Herman and his companions. The scene shifts to the distant past, where an old man was warning his son that challenging the Lord never ends well, describing his rebellion as a childish tantrum. The son replied that the taxes had reached 70%, and that they would starve if they continued to feed the lords. The father asked him if this was his only justification, and the son replied that ever since the farmer's daughters were hanged in the square, everything had changed. He reminded his father that on the day the youngest girls were to be taken to serve the Lord at night, it was the father himself who had said he would rather die fleeing than let that happen. Then the son revealed that he knew about his father's secret meetings with that girl, and that he was the one who had urged her to flee. The father warned his son that hatred that goes beyond justification is more dangerous, so the son apologized to him. But the rebellion against Lord Suaran was much larger than expected, and the Lord, who had remained silent until then, finally moved. The scene returns to the past to reveal the consequences of that rebellion. As Lord Suaran moved as if he fully expected things to reach this stage, he responded in a manner befitting his status and dignity. He suppressed the first large-scale rebellion in the region with extreme violence, ending the rebellion in a dismal failure, without achieving any gains or objectives. The father could do nothing but secretly watch his son's body hanging in the public square. That was the most he could do. However, the Lord, with complete indifference, kept the father's position as a supply official untouched. The moment the father realized this, he decided to flee from Suaran, for a horror that could never be forgotten had taken root in that place. This deep trauma began the moment 3 knights alone slaughtered 400 militiamen without getting a single scratch. We return to the present. The village chief was lost in thought, remembering what had happened to his son, as the villagers were shouting in anxiety, calling out to their leader. Suddenly, one of Herman's men moved quickly, announcing that this man, one of the elders, was saying something, and before he could finish his sentence, he stabbed the elder named Den and killed him. The chief screamed the name of his other companion, Henderson, in terror, but before he could do anything, another man stabbed Henderson and killed him as well. Herman addressed the chief calmly, explaining that what had happened was not something to be resentful about, but merely a legitimate execution. He added coldly that politeness should precede speaking with a knight, asking sarcastically if the chief didn't know that. Then he told him that, as an exception, he would give him one chance, and asked him if he was sure he didn't want any more executions. Elsewhere, after Leon was injured, he was falling from the sky after the massive explosion, thinking to himself, wondering if his birth in this way was a mistake. Should he accept his fate and die obediently? He wondered what form he should take. As he was falling, a pack of wolf-like beasts with red eyes began to gather below, drawn to him. And would he be allowed to live? Little is truly known about ogres despite their existence. The beasts gather around the injured Leon. Leon's mother explains that there are beasts that can be considered excessively fast or extremely strong, but ogres alone follow a completely different path. They insist on always acting individually, yet they possess a unique power that sets them apart from others. The mystery continues as to the principle by which such a solitary creature can dominate the forests it inhabits. There are no words to describe their nature, other than using exaggerated expressions, for it is the only way that comes to mind to describe them. Meanwhile, facing the village elders, Ken saw through his binoculars Herman approaching him, with the village chief as a hostage. Herman launched a powerful and sudden attack, and directed his attack from the blue aura towards the wall of the village fortress, which resulted in a massive explosion of energy that caused great destruction. One of Ken's men screamed in shock and told him that the damage had not reached them, suggesting that they launch a quick counterattack, but Ken stopped him. Ken realized that if Herman had wanted to, he could have wiped them all out with a single blow. He concluded that the only reason he had deliberately missed the target was to warn them to surrender because he had a hostage, and for this reason they decided that they could not provoke his anger and had to stall as much as possible. Suddenly Ken looked at the village chief and found him alone, without any companions from the village with him. Ken called one of his men, Jack, and asked him anxiously if the village chief had met them alone. Jack replied that the chief was accompanied by his personal guards. This news worried Ken, who immediately ordered the search party to be withdrawn and to confirm the identity of the chief's companion first, announcing that he would take on the task of buying time himself. His men objected to his going alone, considering it too dangerous. But Ken insisted, and gave his orders that if things went wrong, all the villagers should be evacuated through a secret underground passage, because in the face of such enemies, human life has no value. Herman was thinking about the Baron's words, who spoke as if he saw himself above all constraints, wondering between the lines, if everything in the world is subject to his will, where can his limits even exist? And what is the value of the process in the eyes of others if the result is guaranteed as he wants? He said to him sarcastically, wondering if anyone really believed that his rise from the bottom to the top happened only because of his own will. The Baron explained to Herman that he did not want his words to seem like a detraction from his experiences or suffering. The Baron pointed out that logic dictates that the existence of a person with guiding attributes should be taken into account, as if that were a condition that could not be ignored, and that once one accepts that it is not something a single person can do alone, the focus shifts to what is real and practical. At that moment, from a distance, Leon was vowing that he would not let things go as his opponent wished. Ken stepped forward to face Herman, saying that a noble knight like him would never understand their way, and that he would show them how they communicate in this place, considering that this would be his greeting to him. Herman immediately realized that Ken was trying to stall for time. He asked him sarcastically if he really thought things would go as he wished, and then launched a violent attack that knocked Ken to the ground, causing one of the elders to scream his name in terror. The village chief begged Herman to punish only him and be done with it, asserting that the others knew nothing. He added that it was enough for him to be the bait, pleading with him to leave the rest alone. But Herman, his patience exhausted, shouted, "Enough!" and then launched a violent attack and finished off the remaining elders with his powerful sword strikes. Ken appeared lying on the ground in the middle of the battlefield. Herman looked at Ken, who appeared in a wretched state, as if standing on the line between life and death. Realizing that the battle was not over yet, Herman announced with an arrogant smile that this was just the beginning and that the hunt had just begun. He ordered his men to cover this filthy forest with the scent of blood, and then they all rushed to attack Leon. The fight began, but Herman laughed sarcastically, criticizing Leon for being so hasty that he abandoned his mother. Then he engaged him directly. Herman pointed his sword directly at Leon, charged with the sword's energy that flowed along its edge to increase its power and the force of its thrust, unleashing a whirlwind of his devastating sword energy. Herman noticed Leon's strange movement, and mocked him for daring to resist him, considering that this was all he had. He shouted at him, saying that he was no different from the rest, and then dealt him a powerful blow, expressing his disappointment. But in his moment of arrogance, Herman was suddenly attacked by wolf-like beasts that attacked him from all sides. Herman was shocked by the unexpected attack, and the beasts severely wounded him. Herman's companion was coughing up a lot of blood, affected by his deep wounds, while his condition worsened with every breath he took. He cursed the situation, admitting that he had let his guard down for a moment. Dust and steam covered the area, obstructing his vision. He realized that the steam rising from the beast's wounds was mixed with some kind of drug, and concluded that all of this was just a well-laid hunting trap. Through the steam, a huge beast with glowing red eyes appeared. It was a scavenger, and at that moment, Leon appeared behind him to continue the fight. The fight continued, as Herman's companion thought angrily that this was the same pattern Leon had used to manipulate him in the forest. He wondered if he had dragged him all this way just to mess with him again. His resistance did not last long, as Leon pounced on him with the help of the scavenger beasts, and they inflicted fatal wounds on him. Leon grabbed him and pinned him to the ground with force. The man fell to the ground bleeding, and asked Leon in despair why he had done it. The man added that if he was planning to leave him half dead like this, he would have been better off killing him the last time. Leon seemed to respond with a roar, so the man concluded that this was proof that Leon wanted to show him more of his power. He realized in his final moments that Leon was not like the other beasts he had fought, but was completely different from the ground up. At that moment, Herman intervened in the battle and launched a wide-ranging attack, injuring his companion, who was being held by Leon, and engaged Leon in a fierce fight. Leon pounced on Herman at top speed. Herman managed to knock Leon to the ground, and then stood over him, mocking him, calling him a hybrid beast. He wondered if he knew the meaning of being a knight, and vowed that he would teach him that painful lesson himself and on his own level. Meanwhile, inside the house, Tilak was talking to Leonia. Tilak thought that the beast who had cried just at the thought of his mother had fled without looking back, and concluded that it must have been something his wife had begged him to follow. He assumed she was afraid of being left alone with him, but Leonia replied that it was natural for a mother to worry about her child. She then asked him what she should do to calm his anger towards her son. Tilak mocked her situation, calling her pathetic. He reminded her that she was once the noble daughter of a great kingdom, living in luxury, and wondered how she had fallen to this level. He told her that time was short, and he would not go into detail, then revealed that his grudge was not only because of her beastly son, but because of her pride that she had not abandoned even in such a situation, and the way she had looked at him with disdain as if he were just a noxious weed. He declared that he would not gain confidence until he had mercilessly broken that pride. And at that moment, a mysterious green glow erupted. Suddenly, a mysterious green glow erupted from behind Leon's mother, and a warrior appeared, attacking Tilak in complete surprise. Herman screamed in shock, wondering what had happened and calling her by her real name, Bensalot. Outside, a fierce battle raged between Leon and Herman, as they clashed in a violent struggle interspersed with flashes of blue energy. Herman wondered how long Leon planned to just run away. Leon charged with all his might, using his shoulder as a human battering ram, and rushed to collide with Herman in a surprise attack. Herman blocked Leon's charge with his sword, but the force of the blow was so immense that it pushed him back, dragging his feet on the ground. And Herman began to think that this struggle between hunting and predation would never end if one of them could not settle the matter. Herman noticed that there was a strange power leaking from Leon, a power he had never seen before. He sneered to himself at the idea that a lowly hybrid like Leon could become the king of the forest in such a short time. He continued his sarcasm, considering what he was seeing from Leon to be laughable, and wondering if this was all he could show. A huge beast appeared behind Herman and tried to pounce on him from behind, but Herman caught its movement at the last moment, so he turned quickly and dodged the attack. Herman managed to deliver a powerful blow that cut off the beast's hand. Herman did not give the beast a second chance, so he pounced on it using one of his combat skills. With each blow of his sword, the beast's breath became shorter, until he delivered the final blow that tore it to shreds, and its remains were scattered on the ground. Herman stood panting, trying to catch his breath, while drops of the beast's blood fell on him from above like a dark rain. Leon asked in amazement how Herman could be a knight, and the latter smiled sarcastically and replied with a counter-question, wondering what Leon had originally thought of him. Leon commented that this was to be expected from a knight, as he was completely different from ordinary soldiers. Herman had managed to avoid the trap he had set for him even in that state. Herman flew into a rage, calling Leon a worthless hybrid and vowing to make him pay for daring to talk back to him. Leon mocked him, saying that as a knight he couldn't even target his weak points, he who was just a puppet from Travinia. Herman told him angrily that he was forgetting his place. Herman launched his sword towards Leon, charged with a roaring internal energy that propelled the blade to pounce on him with lightning speed. The situation gave Leon no chance to maneuver, so he received the sword's thrust with his shoulder directly in a desperate attempt to block the blow. Herman told him he would teach him himself what that meant, but Leon managed to avoid his attack, and one of the wolves appeared and bit Herman's hand. Leon took this opportunity, delivering a crushing blow. That sent Herman flying. After the battle ended, the village chief stood amidst the destruction, holding one of his fallen companions, and looking at the scene in silence and deep sorrow. Leon holds the defeated Herman by the neck. Herman remembers angrily, calling Leon the scum of Travinia and a slave of the Uruks, and expressing his disgust that people like him were the ones who had driven the continent's knights into this miserable state. Leon replies, wondering about the usefulness of these threats, asserting that he has already overcome the meaning of the word knight and can do it again and again. Herman guesses that Leon's attachment to this title means that he himself is from Travinia, to which Leon replies that he never wanted things to get to this point. Herman screams in anger about the amount of suffering he has endured to reach his position and delivers a punch that finishes him off for good. Leon stands alone amidst the destruction after killing Herman. Leonia comes out of her house after the battle is over. Leonia was looking for Leon. Leon appears from behind the house, having returned after a fight even though she had told him to flee. He justified his action by saying that he could not leave because the enemies were planning to use the villagers as bait. Leonia blamed him, reminding him that he could have died, and asked him if he was willing to sacrifice his life for a village that had disowned him before. Leon insisted that they were good people who had sheltered them, and that they were just weak and scared. But she warned him that this was no reason to die for them, and that because of what had happened, they would try to abandon them again, which shocks him. Leon realized that this was not an unlikely possibility, and that her words might be true, and that he had to act as she said to protect himself in this world. Leon asks Leonia how she is and what happened to Tilok. She told Leon that Tilok had simply left when the knight did not return. Leonia notices his miserable state and tells him to rest now and they will clean up later. Leon agrees, and tells her that he will prepare a place for her to rest as well. But he stops and tells her the truth. He fought because he thought it was the only way he could continue to live with her, and begged her never to ask him to run away again. Later that night, Leonia sat watching him as he slept, and looked at the glowing green pendant around his neck. Meanwhile, the villagers gathered around a large fire in the village, and in the village hall, the chief sat alone, worried. He remembered his conversation with Ken, who had told him that he did not hold him responsible for the death of his son Daryl because of Leon. But Ken asked him if he could guarantee that such a tragedy would not be repeated, reminding him of how dangerous it was for a knight to remember them in this world. The village chief sits in the village hall, worried, and suddenly a strong green light appears before him. A huge armored man materializes from the light, and the chief realizes that the problems have already begun. The chief calls the armored man by the name Kazlan, marveling at his use of Bensalot's power, and asks him if he has been watching everything all this time. Kazlan confirms that he told the chief that such a day would come. He explained that although they had gone through many dangers over the past 14 years, this situation was different. He insisted that as long as Leon was connected to a knight, the princess's, Leonia's, safety was no longer guaranteed. The chief wondered if the problem was because of witnesses, specifically the mercenary with the thick beard, Tylok. Kazlan reassured him that measures had already been taken to silence him, and that he had dealt with the matter on his end. The chief realized with a shock that this meant Kazlan had already contacted Leonia. Kazlan remained silent for a few moments, while Leon was asleep in his room. Then he asked the chief about her decision. The scene shifts to Leonia writing a letter next to her sleeping son's pendant, while tears streamed silently from her eyes.